Be me, Mara, 28 years old, managing a coffee shop downtown, been at that place for going on 3 years now. Not a barista, let me be clear about that. I'm the manager, the one who shows up first and leaves last and knows where every single thing in that building is kept. Scheduling, ordering stock, training new hires, dealing with the health inspector, smoothing over complaints from customers who act like a slightly imperfect latte is a personal attack. The kind of job where you get good at reading people fast, because if you can't read a room, you're going to have a very bad time. You learn pretty quickly that most situations have a shape to them before they fully form. A customer walking in already with that particular set to their jaw, someone on the team starting to move too slow in a way that means something is wrong at home. I got good at catching those things early, good at knowing how a situation was going to go before it arrived. I'm genuinely good at it. Not bragging, just stating a fact, because it becomes relevant later in a way that I'm not proud of. I say I'm good at reading people, and then this entire story happens, so anyway. Cole. That's where this whole thing starts and ends and kinda loops back on itself. I met him about a year and a half before everything fell apart. The actual meeting was nothing memorable. Mutual friends, some gathering at someone's apartment. The usual way adults in their late 20s meet people. Somebody I knew from work knew somebody he knew from his clinic. Those two were dating. Group dinner happened. He was standing near the kitchen, talking to someone about something completely unremarkable. Had cat hair on his jacket, I noticed that early. He's a vet, works at a clinic across town, deals with animals all day. The cat hair was basically a permanent feature of any outfit he owned. We talked that night, exchanged numbers, started texting, went on a few actual dates. It became a real thing without either of us making a formal declaration about it. Just gradually more time together until one day there was a routine, and the routine had both of us in it. Around 8 months in, he started leaving things at my place. Clothes, a charger, toothbrush, eventually a shelf in the bathroom, and then a drawer in the dresser. He kept his apartment technically, but was at mine most nights. And his cat came with the territory. Big orange cat, Cole had him for years, completely devoted to the thing. Talked to it like it was a person, gave it elaborate explanations for why he had to go to work, apologized to it when he got home late, would hold whole one-sided conversations with it about his day, which I thought was endearing at the time, and said something about who he was, the kind of person who thinks even a cat deserves an explanation. For a long stretch, things were genuinely good between us. He cooked, not anything impressive, just regular food that was edible and warm and ready when I got home from a late shift. Was present in conversations, actually listened, remembered things I had mentioned days or weeks earlier, and would bring them up naturally. Came and picked me up a few times when I was too tired to drive after closing. Sat with me once for a long time when I was in a bad place about something that happened at work. Didn't offer solutions or try to fix anything, just sat there. Didn't make a big deal of any of it, didn't expect acknowledgement. There was this baseline steadiness to him that I had never quite experienced with someone before. He was just there in the way that reliable things are there. You don't think about them until they're not. And I'm getting ahead of myself again, but that sentence is basically the whole story. The cat's name was something I've genuinely forgotten. I want to say it was a weird name, something that didn't match how big and orange and calm the cat was. Cole had named him years before we met, back when the cat was apparently still small. The name no longer fit, but Cole refused to change it on principle, said the cat had learned his name and it would be confusing. The cat didn't learn anything. The cat was indifferent to everything, including his own name. But Cole kept using it anyway, this slightly ridiculous name for this enormous orange animal. That was a very Cole thing to do. He had this quality where he just committed to things. Not in a dramatic all-in way, just in a this is how it is way. He'd made a decision about the cat's name at some point years ago, and that was the name. End of discussion. Same with little things in his routine. Same coffee every morning, same route to the clinic, same order at the 3 or 4 places he regularly ordered from. I used to tease him about it a little. He'd say he'd already spent the mental energy on those decisions, and now that energy was available for more important things. It was a joke, but also not a joke. He was like that. Decided on things, and then just did them without revisiting. I found that attractive early on. The steadiness of it. Later I interpreted it as being closed off, inflexible, unable to respond to change. The same quality, just run through a different lens. We had a good year and a couple of months. We traveled once, nothing major, a few days somewhere that required a short flight. The trip was fine, no drama, we got along well without our normal routines to fall back on, which is actually a good test of a relationship, and we had passed it easily. His family liked me, I met them a couple of times. Mine met him twice, my mother had good things to say about him afterward, which was not something she gave out freely. On paper, it was all working. The relationship was functioning, we were compatible, we didn't have screaming fights or recurring unresolved conflicts. Nothing was broken. I broke something that wasn't broken. That's the sentence I keep getting stuck on. But I'm not there yet. Okay, so about 14 months in, give or take, things had settled into this routine. Work, evenings together, weekends doing things, or not doing things. The low-key ordinary texture of a functioning relationship. And the routine was fine. I was not unhappy with the routine, but I started noticing something and then started noticing it more. The thing was that Cole never really pushed back on anything. Not in a sulking way, not in a martyr way, just genuinely agreeable almost all the time. I'd make a plan for the weekend, he'd go along with it. I'd change the plan, he'd adapt without complaint. I'd be in a bad mood after a rough shift. He'd give me space without being asked and without making it a thing. I'd need to cancel something we'd scheduled, because work ran long. He'd say it was fine. Every time, fine. And at some point, that started reading differently to me. Not as easygoing, but as checked out. Not as supportive, but as someone who had stopped caring enough to have preferences. If you never have an opinion about where to eat, do you actually want to be at dinner? If you never express frustration when plans change for the fourth time, are you actually present in the relationship? Or are you just occupying space because it's convenient? I started having this thought more and more. Didn't say it to Cole, just held it. And then I said it to my friends. They had thoughts, as they always did, said he was too comfortable, that men plateau when they feel secure, that they stop putting in effort once they know you're not going anywhere. One of them said something I kept thinking about for a while after, that men who never express needs aren't actually easygoing, they're just emotionally disengaged, that the agreeableness is a kind of passivity that gets mistaken for harmony but is actually just absence, that it puts all the actual emotional maintenance of the relationship on the woman by default. That I was probably doing a lot more invisible work than I was aware of. Another one brought up something she'd read about how men like this outsource their emotional regulation, that they use their partner as an emotional anchor without contributing to the anchor themselves. That being reliably present isn't the same as being emotionally invested, that you can show up physically for years and be completely checked out internally. The conversation was long. We were at someone's place, wine. The usual setting for these conversations, and everyone had a version of the same read on it, that what looked like a good relationship from the outside might actually be me doing all the work while he coasted on the stability I was providing. I walked home from that evening with the whole framework assembled in my head. Neat, internally consistent, explained everything. I sat with that. Because it had the right shape, it had the vocabulary I trusted, came from people I trusted, and once you have a framework and you start looking through it, everything reframes itself through it. His cooking dinner stopped looking like care and started looking like routine. His listening started looking less like genuine engagement and more like a way of avoiding having to contribute his own perspective. The reliability started reading as coasting. Every quality I had found reassuring was getting reinterpreted through this new lens. And I didn't notice I was doing that. That's the part I'm least proud of in retrospect. Not what came after, but this part. The part where I chose a story and then made the evidence fit it. I was managing him the way I managed a situation at work. Identify the problem, name it, build the case. Except at work, I gather the evidence first and then reach the conclusion. Here, I had the conclusion, and I was gathering evidence to support it. And then there was Jess. Jess was a new hire at the coffee shop. I hired her. She came through an application that was actually well put together. She interviewed well. She knew her stuff. Picked up the workflow in her first week, customers responded well to her, didn't cause drama with the rest of the team. I had no issue with Jess. Cole came into the shop one afternoon to pick me up. He did this occasionally when his schedule allowed, and mine happened to end at a reasonable hour. He'd come in, order something, sit near the window, or stand at the counter, wait for me to finish closing out. This particular time he came in, and Jess was on bar. She made his coffee while he waited. They talked while she was making it. The nothing conversation that happens at a counter probably 100 times a day in a busy coffee shop. What kind of day? How long have you worked here? The automatic low-stakes back and forth of a customer and a barista. She laughed at something he said. He smiled. I don't know what was said. Probably nothing. 20 seconds, maybe 30. I was across the shop dealing with a delivery issue, not even fully paying attention, caught it out of the corner of my eye. And something clicked in my head. Not a rational click. The kind where a conclusion your brain has been quietly assembling for weeks suddenly declares itself finished and presents itself as obvious. He was comfortable at home because he was getting something somewhere else. The agreeableness at home was strategic. Men like this keep the domestic situation clean and frictionless while doing whatever they want outside it. I had read about this, heard about it. This was a recognizable pattern. I want to state clearly, again, that nothing happened between Cole and Jess. Nothing was happening and nothing was going to happen. She was a barista making a coffee for a customer and having a 30-second conversation. She didn't know she was being observed. She was just doing her job. But I had decided what I'd seen. And once that decision was made, the plan formed around it pretty quickly. He needed to feel the absence of what he apparently wasn't appreciating. My friends had been saying for weeks that I needed to take my power back. That the way to make someone understand what they have is to make them feel what it's like not to have it. That a man who takes your warmth for granted needs to feel the cold before he understands the warmth. The logic seemed sound, the plan seemed clean. I had the whole sequence mapped out in my head. Pull back, go quiet, let him notice, let him feel the absence, wait for him to try to close the distance. Then when he did, I would have the actual conversation about what I needed, about the Jess thing, about feeling taken for granted, about the invisible test I'd been failing for him all this time by just being available and warm and present. It seemed so controlled, so manageable. I was going to run it like a project, identify the problem, design the intervention, execute it, get the outcome I wanted. Here's what it actually looked like. I went quiet, not with a scene, not with an announcement, nothing that could be pointed to directly. Just pulled back. Shorter answers when he asked about my day. Less engagement in the evenings, phone out more, responses minimal when he said something. At night I turned the other way. Nothing explosive, nothing you could technically call unfair. Just a steady controlled reduction in warmth. Day 1, he didn't say anything. Day 2, he asked if everything was okay when I was getting ready in the morning. I said, yeah, just tired, work stuff. Day 3, he asked if I seemed off to him, or if he was imagining it. I said I was just in my head, stressed about something at work, nothing to do with him. He said, okay, said to let him know if I wanted to talk about the work thing. I said sure, and went back to being quiet. Day 4, he sat down and asked me directly. Said something like, look, I keep getting the sense that something is off and you keep saying no, so I want to ask one more time in case I'm missing something. I said I was fine. He looked at me for a moment, nodded, said, okay, I'll stop asking then, and he did. Day 5, he didn't ask. Day 6, he didn't ask. I was waiting for the escalation, for him to not accept it, to push harder, to come home with something, to do something that showed he was feeling the difference and wanted to close it. He didn't escalate, just kept going. Fed the cat in the morning, went to work, came home, cooked something or ordered, watched whatever he was watching, went to sleep. The same rhythm as always, completely normal, and that was genuinely infuriating in a way I hadn't anticipated, because the whole architecture of the plan was built on him being visibly affected. The assumption was that my warmth was something he relied on and would notice the absence of, and he was just fine, or appeared to be. My friend said men take longer to feel things, that the discomfort was in there, he just wasn't showing it, that the showing would come later, give it more time. So I gave it more time. A full week passed, into the second week, and this is where something shifted in a way I hadn't planned for and didn't have language for right away. He was still there every evening, still doing the things he always did, still perfectly functional. But something in the texture of it had changed, not in a way I could point to and say that's different, more like a change in the background. Something that was there before had stopped. When he made tea, he still asked if I wanted some. When I said something in passing, he still responded. When we were in the same room, there was no hostility, no coldness, no detectable tension. But there was something missing from underneath all of it. Before, when Cole was present in a room, There was this low, continuous sense of him being glad to be there. Not something he performed or announced, just something that came off him, the particular quality of someone's attention when they're actually happy to be in the space they're in. That was gone. I started doing small things to check it. Made a comment about something that I knew he'd normally respond to, waited to see if he'd pick it up. He acknowledged it, moved on. Mentioned something we'd talked about before that used to spin off into a longer conversation. He responded, gave a reasonable answer, and then it ended. Perfectly normal, just not quite the same weight. I told myself I was projecting, that I was so deep into running this thing that I was now manufacturing evidence that it was working in ways I didn't want, that everything was fine, I was fine, this would resolve itself when I decided to let it go. There was a morning somewhere in that second week. I don't know the exact day. I came into the kitchen and Cole was at the counter with his coffee, looking out the window. Not at his phone, not reading anything, not doing a task. Just standing there with his coffee looking at whatever was outside. There was something about the way he was standing that made me stop in the doorway for a second. He looked settled. That's the only word I have for it. Not sad, not tense, not like someone processing something difficult. Not like someone waiting for a resolution. Just completely settled in himself. Like a person who has made a kind of peace with their surroundings and has nowhere else they need to be getting to. I said good morning. He turned, said it back, asked if I wanted coffee, poured some when I said yes. Completely normal, completely courteous. But in that moment, something dropped in my stomach. Because I realized I had been waiting this whole time for him to look like he was hurting. Had been watching for slumped shoulders or a distracted expression or some visible sign that the cold front I'd been running was registering as pain. That the lesson was working. And he just looked like a person having a quiet morning. I went to work and thought about it most of the day. Ran through the explanations, came back to the same one every time. Men are socialized not to show it. He was hurting internally, absolutely. But he'd been conditioned his whole life to suppress that rather than display it. Male emotional suppression, completely standard, well documented. He was definitely feeling the absence and just not letting it surface because that would mean admitting vulnerability. That had to be it. That was it. Came home that evening and tried something different. He was in the kitchen doing something. I came up behind him and put my arms around him. He didn't pull away, didn't stiffen, just paused what he was doing. And I've replayed that pause many times since. Before, if I did that, something would happen. He'd turn around, or he'd bring one hand up over mine, or he'd do some small thing that said, I see you, and I'm glad you're here. Something instinctive and warm. This time he paused and stood there, politely. The way a person stands when they're receiving a gesture and processing whether they know how to receive it. Not cold, not hostile, just not there in the way he used to be. I stood there for a few seconds and then let go and stepped back. He went back to what he was doing. I went to the living room, sat down, and understood that something had actually changed. Not temporarily, not something that was going to correct itself when I decided to end the silent treatment and warm back up again. Something had moved in a direction I hadn't accounted for in any version of the plan. The next few days I tried to come back to normal from my end. More present in the evenings, more engaged when he said things. Asked about a case he'd mentioned from work, a dog they'd been treating for something complicated. He talked about it, I actually listened, asked things back. He asked about something at the shop. We had an actual conversation, reasonable, connected. But underneath it something was still different, like the words and the structure of normal were there, but the roots had shifted. I talked to my friends again, described what was happening. They said he was running a counter-strategy, that he'd identified the dynamic and had decided that instead of chasing, he would mirror it back and make me feel anxious enough to start chasing him. That the calm was calculated. That staying serene while the other person feels unstable is a classic manipulation move. That this was actually concerning. That the composure was a performance designed to make me feel like the erratic one. Emotionally unavailable, using calm as leverage, punishing me through withdrawal. I held on to that framing because it was comfortable. It explained what was happening without requiring me to look at what I had done first. He was the one being strategic. He was the one using emotional distance as a tool. I came home ready to name it, sat down with him and said I felt he had been distant lately, that something in the way he'd been present over the past week was cold and checked out. He asked what specifically he had done. I said just the overall way he was engaging, or not engaging, with the relationship. He was quiet for a moment, then said that for about 2 weeks before this I had been short, quiet, not really present, and every time he asked if something was wrong, I told him nothing was wrong. Said he'd stopped asking at some point because I kept telling him there was nothing to address, that he wasn't trying to punish me, that he had just stopped trying to pull something from me, that I kept indicating I wasn't offering. I told him that wasn't the same thing, that a real partner reads beneath the surface answer. He said he wasn't going to keep pushing past what I explicitly told him, because overriding my stated no felt wrong to him, regardless of what he might suspect underneath it. I told him that was a convenient framing. He said he genuinely didn't know how else to frame it. The conversation went in circles. I kept feeling like he was using level language to avoid accountability. He kept returning to the sequence of events. What happened first? What followed? At some point I said something about how this is a recognizable pattern, men disengaging and then positioning the woman's reaction as the problem. That the timeline always got reframed to center whatever the man did as a response to what the woman did first. He didn't raise his voice, didn't get agitated, said, "I hear you," which landed wrong, not because of what it said, but because of what it felt like a technique, like a way of appearing to receive something, while actually just waiting for it to finish. I said I didn't feel like he was actually engaging with what I was saying. He said he was. I said his behavior over the last week showed otherwise. He said his behavior over the last week was a direct response to mine over the 2 weeks before that. We stopped, went to bed. Said nothing more that night. In the morning, he was gone before I got up. I went to work. Came home. And then the held breath phase. Both of us there, both functional, both civil. But with the air pressure slightly off in a way that you feel in your chest before you can describe it, I kept cycling through versions of what to say. Kept thinking if I could find the right angle, the right framing, explain the original feeling that started all of this, without it sounding like what it actually was. He'd understand, the warmth would come back, we'd be back. But every time I tried to open something up, it landed flat. He'd respond and engage, and then it would end, and nothing would have shifted. There was one evening I came home with food from a place we both liked. Just bought extra of mine, enough for 2, the way I used to do it. Put it on the counter, he said thanks and got plates. We ate, talked about a few things. Normal surface conversation. He thanked me again when he finished, and I sat there watching him clean up and thought about how this exact thing 6 months ago would have felt like just a regular Tuesday. And now it felt like I was performing normalcy for an audience that had already left the theater. That's an overdramatic way to put it, but that's how it felt. I tried talking to my friends again during this period. Different conversation than before. This one was more me describing a feeling I couldn't name than me reporting evidence of a theory. Said something felt different, that I couldn't get it back to where it was before, that I didn't know what I'd done, but something had moved. They said it was him, that he was running the counter move, that I needed to call it out. Some place that a few people had recommended. He said, yeah, we should do that. Normal answer. But it had the feeling of something you say to maintain the surface of a situation, rather than something you actually mean. I noticed that and didn't say anything about it. Talked to my friends again. They escalated the whole read. Said he was definitely running the calm as control thing, had figured out the dynamic and was leaning into it. That the composure wasn't emotional maturity, it was a power move. That I needed to name it directly and not let it get reframed. So the next evening I sat him down and said what I said. That what he'd been doing was emotional manipulation. That using detachment strategically to make the other person feel unstable and anxious was a control pattern. That staying artificially calm while someone is trying to communicate was not healthy relationship behavior. It was a way of maintaining dominance through composure. He let me finish, then sat there for a moment, then said clearly and quietly that he hadn't been withholding anything, that I had been cold and quiet for 2 weeks, and every time he asked what was wrong, I said nothing was wrong. That at some point he had made the decision to stop asking and just believe what I kept telling him, which was that everything was fine, that he wasn't performing calm as a strategy, that he had genuinely stopped trying to pull warmth out of someone who kept telling him warmth wasn't required. I said he was twisting the sequence. He said he was just describing it. I told him that this, right here, the way he made everything sound so reasonable, was exactly what I was talking about. That this kind of deflection disguised as rationality was avoidance. He said he genuinely didn't know what to say. that he had tried to communicate, been told repeatedly there was nothing to communicate about, adjusted to that, and now the adjustment was being framed as an assault, that he had no idea what the right response would have been. I said something about men defaulting to this, detachment dressed up as reasonableness, framing their own avoidance as the other person's fault. He was quiet, then said something like, he wasn't sure where to go from here. We didn't say more that night. He slept on the couch or went back to his place, I'm not sure which. I was already in bed when I heard whatever happened. In the morning, he was gone. I went to work. He went to work. Came home that evening, and something was different about him again. Not agitation, not sadness. More like the look of someone who has made a decision they've been sitting with for a while and has stopped sitting with it. He sat down and said he wanted to talk. Said it plainly. I said, okay. Said he'd been doing a lot of thinking and he didn't think things were working. Said it wasn't just the argument, that was just the most recent surface. Said something about a feeling he'd had for a long time, that there was an invisible test running somewhere in the background. A set of rules he didn't know, but kept failing. That he'd put a lot of energy into trying to figure out the right answer and kept missing it. Said he wasn't blaming me, just being honest about what the experience had felt like from his side. I asked if he was breaking up with me. He said he thought it was the right call. I didn't say anything right away. Then said it felt sudden, that we could work through it, that what had happened over the past few weeks wasn't a reason to end the whole thing. He said it didn't feel sudden to him, and that's the sentence I kept returning to in the weeks after. It didn't feel sudden to him, which meant he'd been sitting with this conclusion for a while. Meaning, while I was running the lesson, while I was watching for evidence, while I was explaining his behavior to my friends and building the case about manipulation and control, he was quietly reaching the end of something in himself, not out of spite, not as a counter move, just reaching a conclusion. I told him I didn't think it was fair to walk away without actually trying. He said he had tried to communicate several times over the past weeks, and had been told each time there was nothing to communicate about, that he'd done what he could with what he was given, and he didn't see a path from here. No raised voice, no cruelty, no dramatic final statement. Just a quiet, clear accounting of how things had gone and where he'd ended up. I didn't have anything useful to say to that. Everything I wanted to say felt like arguing with a calculation, using only feeling, and I could see it wasn't going to change what had already been decided. He didn't leave that night, but the decision was in the room, and there was no version of the evening that was going to undo it. The next few days he collected his things, not all at once, not dramatically, a bag here, a few items there, the kind of methodical, unhurried leaving that is somehow worse than the dramatic kind. Drama implies things still matter enough to be performed. This was just logistics. The last thing he took was the cat. I was in the apartment when he came for it. I watched from somewhere while he got the carrier out and put the cat in it. The cat went in like he always did. No protest, settled himself, looked at Cole. Cole talked to him quietly while he latched the carrier. Apologized for the car ride, probably. Gave him an explanation of where they were going. That was a very Cole thing to do. He took the carrier out to his car. Came back in briefly to check if he'd missed anything. I said no. He said, okay. That was the last time we were in the same room. A few days later, he texted asking if there was anything left. I found the jacket and the book. He arranged to pick them up when I was at work. My roommate let him in. He came, he got the things, he left. Didn't need to see me. Life continuing without a pause. I kept going to work. Kept doing the job, scheduling, inventory, training, handling the daily situations that needed handling. Jess was still there. Still good at the job. Still had absolutely no idea that she had been a piece of this whole story. Some weeks later, I was standing behind the counter, watching her work and thinking about how it had all started. Her making a coffee, Cole smiling at something. 30 seconds. Probably nothing was even said that was interesting. Just two people exchanging the automatic pleasantries of a transaction. She didn't know. Still doesn't. I sent Cole a message at some point. Said I'd been thinking about things and thought we should talk. He replied the next day. Said he didn't think talking would change anything at this point, but he hoped I was doing well. Short. No residual anger in it. No hurt. Nothing left. Just nothing. And nothing is harder to sit with than anger. Anger gives you something to push against, respond to, match. Nothing sits there and gives you no options except yourself. Here's what I kept coming back to when I sat with it long enough. The whole plan was built on one assumption, that pulling back would create a pressure in him that would make him move toward me, that the absence of warmth would make him feel the value of the warmth. And he did try at first. He asked what was wrong 3 times in 3 days. That was him trying. I said nothing each time, so he stopped, which is the rational thing to do when someone tells you 3 times there is nothing wrong. But in my framing at the time, him stopping meant he didn't care enough to keep going, when the actual picture was that I had removed every reasonable reason to keep going. He had asked, been told no, and respected that. And I used the respect as evidence of not caring. The test had no answer that would have passed. If he kept pushing past my no, I would have said he was ignoring my stated answers. If he stopped when I said stop, I said he was emotionally withdrawing. There was no version of his behavior my theory was going to accept as care. And then when he eventually started matching the energy I'd been putting out for 2 weeks, I called it manipulation. Called it a control pattern. Used every framework I had to describe his response to my behavior as a character flaw. None of it changed what happened. My friends had the story, avoidant, passive, using calm as a tool. And I built on it and extended it because it was easier than the other thing. The other thing being that I had run a deliberate test on someone who had never given me an actual reason to test him. I had a feeling, and I ran a feeling through a framework, and I got a conclusion. And then I designed an intervention based on the conclusion without ever checking whether the conclusion was true. I thought Jess was something. Jess was nothing. I thought the agreeableness was absence. It might have just been someone who had a calm way of being. I thought the lesson would show him what he had. The lesson showed him something else entirely. The part that keeps coming back to me is something small. We had this routine where on certain mornings, if we were both around, he'd make the coffee and I'd sit at the counter and we'd talk about nothing much. Not every morning, not a scheduled thing, just sometimes it happened. And during those 2 weeks that I was running the lesson, it just stopped happening. Not because either of us decided to stop it, just because I was being short and he stopped initiating things. And I remember a morning during that period where he was already out the door before I was up. And I had this small, disappointed feeling that the coffee hadn't happened. And I sat with that feeling and then filed it under more evidence that he was pulling away, when actually I had been the one making every morning feel like a room you didn't want to walk into. He'd just eventually stopped walking in. I'm not writing this to make myself the villain. I'm writing it because I kept using the language of someone who had been wronged when I was also the one who had done something, who had deliberately created a situation designed to destabilize someone, and then called his response to it a pathology. He's gone, the cat is gone. And I'm the one standing in the kitchen in the morning, looking out the window. Not because there's something out there worth looking at, but because sometimes you run out of things to wait for and you have to put your eyes somewhere. I get that now. I didn't before. I thought he was somewhere else in his head when he did that. Turns out he was just done. And I stood there looking at it and thought I was the teacher in the room. I was the lesson. I just didn't know it until the class was already over.